Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. Look, if you've ever watched a brilliant, meticulously engineered AI model just completely stall out the moment it hits the real world, you know exactly the kind of heartbreak we're talking about today. We are going to investigate the mystery of why technically flawless enterprise AI tools are routinely abandoned by the exact people they were built to help. We're dissecting a rigorous framework that explains why deployment is where most projects go to die, and more importantly, exactly how we can engineer our way out of that dreaded last mile. So let's just rip the Band-Aid off right out of the gate with this staggering number, 88%. Just let that sink in for a second. Across the industry, nearly 9 out of 10 AI agent pilots fail to ever graduate into production. It's a massive, expensive graveyard of lost time, burned budgets, and incredibly frustrated engineering teams. And here is the absolute kicker that explains why. We literally obsess over the models, right? But 77% of these failures have absolutely nothing to do with technical integration or model performance. None of it. They have everything to do with strategy, governance, and change management. It turns out, you can have an engineering team that is top tier on the technical stack, but if they ignore the non-technical reality, they're going to ship way fewer successful projects than a team that balances both.
Let's make this super concrete. Consider the baffling mystery of Meridian Trust, a regional bank that rolled out an AI fraud triage assistant. The vendor, who is helmed by Stanford PhDs by the way, delivered an absolute technical triumph. On the bank's historical data, the AI boosted precision by 34%. The executives literally clapped at the demo. Fast forward just 11 weeks later, a shocking 91% of the bank's analysts were actively bypassing the tool. No joke, they were taking screenshots of the AI's output and manually typing it right back into their old 1990s mainframe.
So what happens next? Well, you know the drill. The vendor throws their hands up and vaguely blames change management. The executive points the finger right back at the vendor. But honestly, neither of those are actionable answers. The technical stack worked perfectly, which means we have to rule out technical flaws entirely. We need to deploy a completely different diagnostic instrument to figure out what actually killed this pilot before the rest of the year's budget goes up in smoke.
Enter the soft stack. Now let's be clear, this isn't about having some vague people skills. It is a rigorous, 5-part engineering discipline designed specifically to bridge that massive gap between a system that gets shipped and a system that actually gets adopted. These 5 pieces together cover that massive 77% non-technical failure surface we just talked about. So let's break them down.
Okay, component 1, stakeholder cartography. The crucial point here is that you have to look far past the official corporate org chart. You literally have to go hunting for the informal nodes of power, the people who can quietly veto your tool. This means explicitly mapping everyone whose daily workflow is impacted and classifying them by their actual power, their interest, and their current stance towards your project.
And boy, did the vendor at Meridian totally botch this. They mapped exactly 3 people, the chief fraud officer, the CIO, and the head of fraud ops. And by doing that, they made the union steward, the external OCC examiner, and the frontline shift supervisors completely invisible. Those shift supervisors, they were the actual gatekeepers of daily adoption, and nobody even knew they were missing from the map until the whole project crashed. Moving on to component 2. Translation craft. What's super interesting here is that it demands communication in 2 directions. It is not just about taking a business goal and turning it into code specs. You have to translate the reality and the limitations of that code back into the language of the business. You have to make sure the problem you're solving in the code is the actual problem they're experiencing on the floor.
Look at how Meridian failed this one. The vendor took the business goal of saving time and successfully translated it into a blazing fast model, but they completely failed to translate back the strict SR 11.7 banking regulations. They built a black box that passed the developer's eval perfectly, but failed the bank's regulatory reality, which absolutely required a documented human-in-the-loop override. The bank didn't have the technical vocabulary to say, your eval is not our eval, well, until it was way too late. Which brings us to our third component, trust architecture. Listen, trust isn't an ambient mood in the office. In the soft stack, trust is a measurable, renewable resource. It's an equation. Ability multiplied by benevolence multiplied by integrity. And it's multiplication, right? So if any one of those 3 is a 0, the whole thing equals 0. You have to deliberately design how you demonstrate all 3.
At Meridian, the vendor proved ability, the model caught fraud faster. They proved integrity, they were honest on the proposal. But they scored an absolute 0 on benevolence. They didn't once sit down with a fraud analyst and ask, hey, what part of your Tuesday morning might this new tool actually make worse? Because of that, the analyst looked at the tool and instantly knew it was built for the CFO's metrics, not to help them. Boom. Zero trust. Component 4 is Adoption Choreography. This is all about sequence. It treats behavior change as a highly structured discipline with specific phases. You have to move users fluidly through awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. It requires strategically engineered communications, pilot waves, and crucially, you got to align those user incentives.
So what was Meridian's grand adoption choreography? They sent a single, generic email on a Friday and expected total transformation by Monday morning. I mean, come on, they completely skipped the phase of creating user desire. The analysts knew the tool existed, sure, but their daily performance metrics gave them zero reason to actually want to use it. They changed the workflow, but they completely ignored the incentives.
Finally, Component 5, Political Economy. Now this one can get a bit awkward, but it's absolutely vital. It is about knowing the institutional reality of internal capital. It's not just knowing who wrote the check for your project. It's about knowing who secretly resents paying for it. You have to know who lost a budget fight so your project could live.
And this is where the Meridian mystery really unwinds. That AI pilot was funded using discretionary money that the head of branch operations fought for to modernize ATMs and lost. And guess who controls the floor environment where those fraud analysts sit? Yep, the head of branch operations. That 91% bypass rate wasn't an accident. It had very quiet senior-level sponsorship from someone who implicitly benefited from the project failing.
When you put it all together into a soft stack scorecard, the post-mortem for Meridian becomes incredibly clear. They didn't suffer a technical failure at all. They scoped the technology perfectly, but they scored an absolute 0 on the organizational system across cartography, translation, trust, adoption, and political economy. This wasn't just bad change management, it was a complete absence of the soft stack.
Let's run one final test of this diagnostic on a different scenario. Brookhaven Mortgage. They deployed a brilliant LLM loan summarization tool with 92% factual accuracy, but it completely stalled at 22% adoption. Why? Well, they mapped the formal org chart but completely missed Diane, a 22-year veteran who was the informal leader everyone quietly checked with. Plus, the tools summarized documents perfectly, but Diane and her team actually needed a tool that reconciled conflicting clauses. They basically built the exact right model for the exact wrong problem.
By running Brookhaven through our scorecard, we prove this framework is a universal diagnostic tool. We can see their political economy is actually clean. Nobody lost a budget fight. So the fixes are clear. Use that clean budget to redesign user incentives, map informal leaders like Diane, and critically, build a public error feedback loop to restore trust. In Brookhaven's case, when users found an error, the vendor just kept repeating that 92% accuracy stat instead of fixing it, which just absolutely destroyed trust.
The true beauty of the soft stack is that it turns these mysterious, frustrating failures into solvable engineering problems. So, as you look back at an expensive pilot that stalled out in your own organization, I want you to really ask yourself, which of these 5 critical pieces were you entirely blind to? Was it a hidden veto, a broken translation, or a total lack of benevolence? Diagnose your gap. Ultimately, you have to ask yourself, are you building the right model, or are you just building the model right? Because mastering the soft stack is quite literally the only way you are ever going to survive the last mile.